Nowadays, RPGs have a lot of different styles. That's something to be expected from a genre defined by playing different roles in regular life. Every year, it seems like there are more developers and more studios releasing games, especially for RPGs, because the genre allows for so much freedom. They're typically massive and complex, but the hallmark of each one is to give freedom to the player. You have games like RoboCop Rogue City, released in 2024, that's very much focused and linear. It sits at the end of the freedom for the player spectrum. Players can move around levels as they wish, but are often focused on specific shooting lanes and restricted to map sections based on the story progression. It's a good game, but the role you're playing is that of RoboCop, so there's really not a lot of wiggle room. At the opposite end sits a game like Kenshi that released in 2018 and has a sequel in development. From the jump, you have total control of every aspect of your character. Once character design is over, you're free to make any choice you want. You can go in any direction at any time and become whatever you want, from a merchant to a bandit to a farmer. The choice is all up to you. Or you can do what I do and fail miserably every time you try to play. The amount of freedom does not determine if an RPG is good. Really, it's just a gauge for complexity in the game. Every aspect from leveling, map design, and NPCs gets larger and harder to handle as the game offers the player more options. Graphics mean less compared to the amount of writing that goes into not just the coding or quest markers that determine when quest events happen, but the literal dialogue to move the story's game and atmosphere along. That's why games like Cyberpunk really blow the lid off, as graphics are also set to 10 on top of everything else. Now, what would happen if you took the features of an RPG and combined it with that of an RTS game? You'd probably guess it'd be terrible, like I would assume. After all, strategy games follow pretty much the exact opposite game formula. They have specific tactics for optimizing your army or squad's efficiency. Sure, there are different strategies you can use, but at the end of the day, order of operations and hotkeys are what win out. We're talking games like Age of Empires or Planetary Annihilation Titans. Surprisingly, though, Tailworld's Entertainment set out to do just that, combine the strict management of RTS and the freedom of an RPG, and in 2008 we got a glimpse of that picture. Mount and Blade was unlike anything else, designed on a custom engine to prioritize player mobility and large-scale battles. This first iteration was far from perfect. It managed to strike a chord, even for me who showed up late to the party. Years after that release, Warband came out in 2010. It offered a more polished version of the first title. While the graphics may have started to feel dated, the second installment cemented their dedication to this completely unique concept. It was totally refined, not only offering quality of life improvements, but also expanded dialogue and physics. Then came with Fire and Sword, which rewrote the era of the games to a more technologically advanced age of muskets and gunfire. It felt like the edge of what could be done with the current version of the game engine. It was masterful and introduced even more refinement, as well as expanding on the multiplayer introduced with Warband. It was like seeing a puppy with massive paws. You loved what you had at the moment, but you knew what would come later would be monstrous. Well, if anything else would even follow it up. Mods flooded every version of the game. One, for example, rewriting the entire code to duplicate the Star Wars universe. Online players became dedicated to the Captain Co-op mode that had players commanding small squads of soldiers with their friends as waves of increasingly tough enemies attacked, like a much more tactical version of Horde mode. Then, more than a decade later, came what felt like the impossible: Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord. What started as 100-man battles with the first iteration of the game could be raised as high as 1,000 units on screen at a time. The formula for tracking your player party on the world map felt completely familiar with the previous titles, but the freedom offered in the first games was expanded. Smithing and stealth features bridged the gap of dialogue scenes without feeling out of place in the even more refined movement and combat mechanics. This also featured an even greater skill tree that placed actually using a skill to advance it, a simple but refreshing movement that felt more practical to the previous versions. Why they sort of offered that, it was very direct in this one. You had to swing your sword for the sword skill to go up. The dialogue became deeper. Even with the vast majority lacking audio, the story and options felt more realistic. In short, the pup had grown up. Multiplayer also grew, offering more players and dedicated matches, fighting as common soldiers side by side in PvP and in siege modes. It matched the standard that the community expected from the older games, while adding what felt like follow-through to the already excellent executions. It wasn't a perfect launch, however. In fact, had I reviewed the game last year, I was prepared to run through the many bugs I'd experienced since it launched that hadn't been fixed, but after playing it in January of 2026, I can say that it feels pretty much perfect. Well, as perfect as such a massive game can actually be. That's one that uses real time physics to determine damage dealt on the battlefield for player movement and projectiles. If you're going faster on your horse, you're going to do way more damage to a unit that you hit. Same with depending on how far away units are when you shoot an arrow at them. This game had more dedicated story options and a larger map, adding new factions and units, one that lets the player control their army with immediate squad orders. Think of Ghost Recon titles. Even though the scale is only like a four-man squad for those games, and this can be hundreds of units at a time, it allows forming advanced formations for them and adapting tactics to the terrain and the unit type that you've comprised your army of. The piece de resistance is that it's constant across every single game. You can choose to play any way you like. From the beginning, you can ignore the story and devise a plan to conquer the world through conquest or even trade. You can ignore everything and spend time becoming a champion of the combat arena. There's no right way to play this strategy game. You can form a massive army of pikemen, archers, and peasants and slowly carve out the map through sheer numbers, or dedicate yourself to heavy cavalry in a small formation, using speed to outmaneuver your enemy both in the world map and on the battlefield stages. You can even reside focused entirely on trade and purchase your kingdom bit by bit, or totally ignore castles and cities and raid caravans, peasants, and armies alike. Bannerlord is so unique because of how well it integrates so many different features. Nationalities, character traits, relationship status, and diplomacy are all constantly in flux between the NPCs as their endless war rages on, and time affects these characters. Too much goes on, and they'll pass from old age, even your own character. So it's important to remember to actually create an offspring. It captures that feeling of playing with army figures as a kid in a fictional world that's comprised entirely of the medieval period's most famous types of soldiers. Combine all of this, and when it comes to RTS RPGs, there can be only one, and that's Bannerlord.